Goes right to go. There are 195 active cases of coronavirus in Victoria, with 11 new cases since yesterday's update. The last time we had less than 200 active cases in Victoria was the 26th of June, so this is an opportunity, a really important opportunity, to congratulate Victorians right across the state for following the rules, sticking to this strategy. These are the results that come from a really determined effort to defeat this second wave, to see this virus off, and then to lock in that COVID normal. So 195 cases, the first time under 200 since the 26th of June. Of the 11 cases that are new today, 6 are linked to known outbreaks and complex cases, 5 are under investigation and 1 was reclassified. There are no new deaths to report today, but of course we take this opportunity to again send our condolences and our best wishes to all of those who've lost a loved one because of this global pandemic. There are 17 Victorians in hospital, 1 is in intensive care, and that person is not on a ventilator. A total of 2,811,114 test results have been received since the beginning of the year, and 15,585 test results have been received since yesterday. Again, that is a very strong number, more than 30,000 tests these last 2 days, and I want to thank and congratulate those almost 15,600 Victorians who just the day before went and got tested. As we come into the weekend, my message is a really simple one around testing. If you've got any symptoms whatsoever, please don't put off getting tested until, say, Monday. Go and get tested as soon as you possibly can. Apart from following the rules, which the vast majority of Victorians are doing, there's arguably nothing more important than symptomatic Victorians, even with the mildest of symptoms, coming forward, attending one of those more than 210 testing sites, getting tested. If you are positive, then we're able to protect you, we're able to protect your family, and we're able to prevent you unknowingly, given how infectious this virus is, spreading it to others. This virus does not discriminate in any way. There should be no sense of judgment or any sense of stigma or shame in testing positive. Arguably, coming forward and getting tested quickly as soon as symptoms start, isolating while you wait for your test result, and then being as forthcoming as you can, being a partner in our public health response. That is arguably the most important thing that anyone can do right across our state at this time. These numbers are falling, they're falling steadily, and we've got to keep them low, and the best way to do that is for those who have symptoms to come forward and get tested, and that way we can wrap our arms around you and your family and make sure that you are properly protected and that every family is properly protected. Again, more than 30,000 tests over these last 2 days is a mighty effort, and I want to personally thank each and every one of those Victorians who came forward to have a test. There are 19 healthcare workers who are active cases. Of course, we wish them well, like all active cases, but we also take this opportunity to thank them and their tens of thousands of colleagues from every sector and from every part of the state for the amazing work that they do every single day. The rolling averages to 8 October are Metro 9.4 cases, Regional Victoria 0.4 cases, cases classified with an unknown source, so mystery cases, for the 14-day period 23 September to 6 October, Metro 12, Regional Victoria 0. Now, on the Metro Regional split, of those 11 cases today, 9 of those are in Metro Melbourne, 1 of those is in Regional Victoria, and there is a further single case that is being further investigated as to, I think we've discussed this a few times, where the address but the whereabouts of the person may be different, so we're just trying to run that to ground and we'll update you accordingly. The one case that is confirmed in Regional Victoria is in fact from the Mitchell Shire and from Kilmore. Total active cases in regional communities, that's 5 active cases, so those numbers remain low, and that's a credit to everybody across regional Victoria who are playing their part. There are different rules in regional Victoria, but there are rules still, and we've seen a very high degree of compliance with those rules, and that should be a point of pride for everybody across regional Victoria, having got those numbers so low, and then to keep them low even with substantial opening up is no small thing. Of the 5 active cases, one of those remains that low positive, which we still believe it's likely to come out of these numbers from Mildura, but from an abundance of caution, that number still remains within our overall active cases. That'll be closed out one way or the other quite soon. Active cases in disability facility settings, I'm very pleased to say that single case that has been with us for a period of time, they've been closed out, so there are no active cases in disability facility settings, and that's very important given the underlying vulnerability of those residents and those settings. Aged care active cases, there are now 45 active cases associated with aged care outbreaks. That'll be a mixture of staff across the full range of staffing and indeed some residents, but that number is obviously falling and substantially lower than when we had a peak some time ago. Just before I throw to Brett to talk about the numbers of the day, I've just got a couple of announcements in relation to masks. I am announcing today that we've ordered a further 1.2 million fitted reusable cloth masks from 6 local manufacturers, and I just want to give them a shout out because of the work they have done for us and the work they will do. Nobody Denim, located in Thornbury, the Arc Thread Group, located in Burwood, Style Print, located in Kilsyth, Australian Defence Apparel, based in Thomastown, with at least 70% of the masks being manufactured at their factory in Bendigo, and the remainder will be produced in metropolitan Melbourne. Blue Gum, located in Nunawading, and Aquatero, located in Pakenham. We thank each of those businesses and their workers for all they have done and all that they will do as part of this 1.2 million additional order. All 6 of those companies are accredited by Ethical Clothing Australia. Since July, there were some questions just about where we'd got to on the previous order, both reusable and single use. I can confirm that since July we've distributed more than 3.6 million single-use masks. This is to the broader Victorian community in compliance with and to assist the people in complying with the broader mask rules, and almost 2.1 million reusable masks to local government offices, community health centres, local pharmacies, general practices, a number of other different organisations that support the vulnerable in our Victorian community, such as disability service providers, home and community care service providers, mental health services, so on and so forth. And we thank all of them for the amazing job they've done in getting those masks out to those who need them. This order of 1.2 million is in addition to those efforts. So that is very, very important in terms of everyone who needs to wear a mask, which is everybody other than those who've got a lawful excuse, being able to access a mask as easily and as cheaply as possible. Just finally on masks, you will know that from this Sunday, so the 11:59 p.m. on the 11th of October, that's that 2-week grace period that we had indicated almost 2 weeks ago, particularly in relation to face shields and fitted masks taking over from the earlier stage where I think we'd put it to the Victorian community that wearing something was better than wearing nothing. So a scarf, a bandana, things of that nature were seen as, in the early stages, that was an appropriate response. That advice has now changed and we've given people that 2-week period. But just by way of a reminder, all Victorians must wear a fitted face mask when they leave their home, no matter where they live. As restrictions ease and of course as movement increases, the effectiveness of masks is even more important and I think quite obvious. We know from so much evidence that super spreading events can be avoided by people wearing masks, and we're so deeply grateful to all Victorians, and I think it is the vast majority of Victorians who have accepted mask wearing. Again, no one necessarily enjoys it. As the temperatures get higher, it becomes a less enjoyable experience, but low cost but very high potential public health benefit. And on that basis, you must wear a fitted mask that covers the nose and mouth. This means that face shields, bandanas or scarves on their own will no longer, from midnight essentially on the 11th, they will no longer be seen as sufficient in terms of the legal requirements on each and every Victorian. We did give people some time to make that change, and those new requirements for a fitted face mask will be enforced from 11:59 p.m. On the 11th of October. Again, I'll remind people that Victoria Police can enforce these rules. It's not a matter of anyone challenging other people. I think it's always best not to be getting into those sorts of debates. And there are lawful excuses, particularly those who have got underlying health issues. There is a process to go through there, and there is an opportunity to be exempted from that requirement. Again, no one's for a moment suggesting that wearing masks is something that's pleasant or something that we would choose to do if it weren't of significant public health benefit. The clear point to make is that it is. And if we all stay the course on that and many other ways in which we've changed the way we live our life, then we can continue to see these numbers drop. We can keep them low. We can find that COVID normal, and we can make sure that that COVID normal Christmas and summer and 2021 is vastly different to 2020. I think that's all I needed to go through today. I might now ask the Chief Health Officer, Professor Sutton, just to speak to the numbers of the day, and then we're happy to take any questions you have.
Thank you, Premier. So 11 new cases, a total increase of 10 with one reclassification. It is great to see that the total number of active cases now below 200 for the first time in a long, long time. Also only 17 patients in hospital, only one in intensive care, and no one on a ventilator at the moment. So that's really a positive. Also to have healthcare worker current active cases below 20, so at 19 today, is terrific. And the active cases in aged care are still at 45, but it has come down significantly. It was over 100 1 or 2 weeks ago. So that's another positive. The numbers for today, again, 6 already linked to known outbreaks or existing known complex cases. Another 500 investigations. Some of those, in fact, the majority, I'm sure, will be linked to known cases or outbreaks. The total numbers that we're seeing on a daily basis are primarily being driven by these outbreaks. They are complex outbreaks. They are challenging, but we are throwing absolutely everything at them. The Kilmore outbreak is a case in point, but there have been additional cases linked to aged care, Uniting Aged Well Preston, another case linked to the family outbreak in Frankston, the Kilmore case I've spoken of, an additional case linked to the Chadstone Shopping Centre outbreak, and another one linked to a complex case. We will get on top of these outbreaks. We always do. We're going to have fewer and fewer new outbreaks emerge, and so the underlying trend in the day-to-day numbers is being driven by those outbreaks. But the good news is that getting on top of those outbreaks means that the really hard to shift numbers are only at 2 or 3 per day. All the rest will be controlled when we control those outbreaks, and I think that's a real positive. But it is, of course, frustrating to see that slow, even if steady movement down over time. We've seen, a bit of a plateauing in recent days. That's very frustrating to see. I'm as frustrated as anyone, but the underlying trend, as I say, will get us there. Happy to take questions.
With that Kilmore mum, Brett, there's been she says there's been delays and conflicting advice up there. Does that worry you that we're still seeing problems there?
Look, I think we're moving to a point where the way that we manage small numbers and outbreaks is going to be even more comprehensive, even more precautionary than ever before. I think that applies especially to regional Victoria. I think that's an expectation of regional Victorians. They've done magnificently in stepping up for the testing, the more than 200 people who've been tested at the various testing sites, and the over 200 individuals who are quarantining at home. We are going to a more precautionary approach with that next ring of isolation for contacts of contacts. There are some elements to work through between the advice that's been given centrally and regionally. we'll take those lessons, we'll hear that feedback, but we want to make it as tight as possible. And I can only thank the people of Kilmore for how they've responded. And if there's clarification around that messaging, and to make sure that we're as clear as we can be about what amounts to complex responses. It's not easy to communicate some of those elements, and there will be changes over time, because there'll be close contacts in that first ring who turn up positive, and that changes what happens to their household contacts and their close contacts. So there is some trickiness there, and I do apologise if there's been confusion, but we're committed to making it right, and we do want to take that additional precautionary approach now that numbers are so low, and now that we're out of stage 4. In stage 4 we were all effectively in a kind of quarantine situation. We were only leaving home for those 4 essential reasons. Now that there's greater movement in regional Victoria especially, we need to have that really strict advice for contacts and their contacts.
On some of those cases, Brett, in Kilmore, families were called up by the DHHS and told that their contacts of contacts had to isolate, but they say they weren't really given an explanation for it. They just said, it's an order that we've been given, we're passing it on. Is that acceptable, do you think? How important is it that when they get these calls, they need to be given the justification and explanation for why it's...
Yeah, I think it's important to be able to give that justification. If I can give it now, and look, we'll work through all of the messaging that has to be given across Victoria, and there are decentralised local public health units, regional public health units that need to get that message on board. It's a changing field, and we need to keep up with that changing advice. The justification is that close contacts have always been at risk from a case. They are potentially exposed people who may develop illness any time 14 days after that exposure. What we're doing with the contacts of contacts is recognising that when a close contact becomes positive or develops symptoms, they've actually been infectious for the 48 hours before they've developed symptoms, and maybe 3 or 4 days before they've got that positive test back. So we're trying to protect those other individuals in the household, the contacts of contacts, from going out and potentially exposing others, because they might have had transmission to them even before that close contact has developed symptoms or tested positive. And that's a precautionary approach that really puts another layer of protection around the community, because occasionally you can have a very short period of time as a close contact before you develop symptoms, and you've already infected your household members. Clearly you can't do that with 700 cases a day. Clearly you don't need to do that when we're asking everyone through stage 4 in Metro Melbourne to stay at home, other than for the 4 reasons. But it is an approach that we can and must take with these final numbers.
On that conflicting advice, people were told to isolate but then also go out and get tested, waiting in those big lines. Is there a need for drive-through testing or even the home testing in Kilmore, do you think?
I don't know what's been specifically arranged for Kilmore. I know that there were the 2 testing sites. They'll be ongoing. People can safely physically distance though in those queues, and there was oversight of that distancing. People of course need to wear masks, and we're talking about for the vast majority of people without symptoms, so the risk is really very low in an outdoor queue for testing, but you can't have drive-through for everyone, and it's not always practical when you're trying to get 200 people in a small town through in one day. They would be waiting for too long for some of those test results. So it's a practical compromise.
Where are we at with the Box Hill? Is it an outbreak officially?
Yeah, it's an outbreak in the sense that there are staff cases linked to Box Hill. The exact source isn't clear, but all of the staff are being tested across that entire health facility. And all of those who are close contacts are being asked to quarantine at home now. So again, we'll get on top of it, but it's a measure of the risk in any health setting, and we need to make sure that we've got that intensive testing process for staff, but also that we're supporting them to the fullest extent with PPE and with policy and procedures to protect them.
How many cases there now?
I believe there are 3.
And how many people are going to be tested there?
There are 4 active cases, so a total of 4. They're all active. They're all being tested across that facility.
With the Kilmore cases, the local health service has been getting involved, Goulburn Valley Health, and people there say they're getting 2 calls within 2 hours from different people that say they don't know, like it's repeating itself over and over again. How confident are you that those communication models are working properly and not overlapping? And is it a case of we're still trying to work out how that works, or do you think it should be at hitting its straps already?
Oh, look, I think we'll always be open to whatever tweaks or tightening that needs to occur. I'm not aware of that specific issue being at play, but there is an absolute keenness to make sure that every single person on the list from the cafe who are identified as close or casual contacts are all being contacted. Again, apologies if people are getting inconvenient contacts. Personally, I would rather that inconvenience than missing out any single individual in Kilmore, and I think the people of Kilmore are also really keen that no one is missed out in terms of getting that reach out. But we will always take the messages back from those regional public health units about what's working and what's not working and tighten it.
That one Kilmore case today, do we know who it is? Is it a worker from the place? Is
it we think it's a casual contact of the cafe, a direct casual contact of the cafe, so someone who went in for a short period of time.
So that would be the first one that's not a staff member or a direct contact with staff?
That's right.
Does that indicate we might have a bigger problem brewing, do you think?
No, I don't think necessarily. There are a lot of people who've been through the testing site. The vast majority of those results are through. They come through within 24 hours, as you know. And I think that's very reassuring. But this is why you do very broad testing. This is why you ask lots and lots of people to step up.
And in the town of Kilmore as well, some shops are, like the local vet, for example, is shut for 14 days. Some shops are shutting because they're wary. What's your advice to them? Should they be shutting out of precaution? What should they do?
Look, each to their own. I think, a business will determine what their level of risk tolerance is. I don't think the risk to those businesses is very substantial at all. But of course, they're weighing up what it means to be closed for a longer term if they have a staff case and then additional staff cases. And so I would leave them to make that call. I think the risk to them is very low, but it's for them to make that judgment.
To be fair, they'd probably be looking to you as our top health person to tell them what they should do.
So I would say the risk is very low, but it's for them to make a judgment about what the criticality of their workforce is and what it might mean for them to have a case.
How many people were tested in Kilmore yesterday, do you know? And how many cases are in that Frankston, Chadstone, Kilmore cluster now, for the 3 clusters?
So the number in the Frankston family outbreak at the moment, there are 7 active cases and it's a total of 12 in total. The testing, over 500? There are over 200 in quarantine, but hundreds tested. 679 people, in fact, have been tested over the last 3 days.
These outbreaks, Kilmore, Frankston, Box Hill Hospital, say you're thinking about releasing restrictions, are they all completely cast to the side when you think about it?
No, not completely cast to the side. Of course, whenever there's an active outbreak, there's the potential for other contacts to slip through, people who don't quarantine appropriately, people who don't get identified. So we always think about that downstream risk of further spread. But knowing where the additional cases have come from, having them linked to those existing known cases and known outbreaks is of course reassuring. It gives us a sense that there's a significant amount of control, but whenever there are active cases, whenever there are active outbreaks, there's that risk of further spread. So they're not cast aside entirely, but certainly they're more reassuring than a case that just pops up in the community where we've got no idea where it's come from.
As it sits today, how big is the contact tracing team?
I don't think it's changed. I think it's still over that 2,000 mark. Again, they've been repurposed in lots of ways. There's a much bigger focus with that workforce on community engagement and testing, and in the local incident management team set up and the outbreak management team set up. So they're much more focused on those active outbreaks and less on the routine, obviously, calls that come in for the close contacts.
Are you happy with that size? Is that about where you want to see it?
Look, it's not my judgment. I think it's more than enough for the work that we're doing, but it's absolutely clear that we need to pivot to a significant preventive approach, a significant engagement approach that really maximises all of those things that we need people to do each and every day. The primary one is isolation when you're symptomatic, getting tested and going home. You've got $450 if you have to wait for a test result. You've got $1,500 if you have to quarantine for 4 days, or if you're isolating as a case. I think they're really key messages that we need everyone to understand. The other bit is masks. I mean, I've seen so many people wearing masks. It's absolutely fantastic. But I do still see people, including in conversation, less than a metre and a half apart, both not wearing masks. A fitted mask has between 40 and 80%, if both people wear it, 40 and 80% reduction in transmission risk. Why would you not do that? I mean, I know the reason why people don't do it. They think, oh, this is my mate. I won't catch coronavirus from someone I'm familiar with, or I won't catch coronavirus from a family member. These are the people who are transmitting to others, the people we're familiar with and our family members. Obviously, our household members, we're not wearing a mask at home. But if you're meeting outdoors, and this is the advice and this is a public health direction, outdoors, another household, another family member, because you're meeting that 2 household and fewer than 5 people, 5 or fewer, you have to wear a mask. It reduces that risk by about half if both people wear it. It's really important.
With the Chadstone and the Kilmore outbreaks, it seems like our strategy for managing them has kind of changed halfway through. We changed to contacts of contacts halfway through the Kilmore cluster. Is part of the reason why we have such stringent targets to release restrictions that we're still ironing out our public health response, that you don't fully trust that we have got great systems in place?
No, there is never a time when we have not looked to refine our public health response. And that's not unique to Victoria. Every jurisdiction is doing that continuously. That's why I'm still having AHPPC conversations on coronavirus multiple times per week. We have to look at where we're at, what needs to be different. And as I say, through stage 4, when everyone was staying at home, that was a really substantial control measure. But we've got a different situation in regional Victoria where people are moving about, people have many more close contacts, and we need an additional precautionary approach to manage that risk because people are moving about. So the idea that we wouldn't continuously change our advice and continuously review our policy positions, especially in the end game. We're talking about the last days and weeks of coronavirus in Victoria, all things being well. So we have to make those changes, and of course they'll be in the middle of certain outbreaks. So we don't wait for something to be over if we think that we need to make a change to make a difference.
Do you fully trust the systems that we have in place?
Yes, I do. I mean, I accept that there will always be gaps and things that we need to tighten up, things that we need to review because there's feedback about what isn't working, and that'll be from our own staff, centrally, regionally, in our local units, but any community member who speaks of the difficulties or the mixed messages or the inconsistencies is a lesson for us, and we should take it as well.
Can I just ask as well, how you both talk about kind of being wary that there's more virus out there than we perhaps know about. Can you give us a sense of like how much that might be? How confident are you that you're picking up every case that's out there with testing?
It's hard to know how many cases are out there that you're not identifying. But we do know that when we've got an increased testing volume, so instead of 9,000 we've got 16 or 20,000, that more confirmed cases are identified. So that to me tells me that there's probably 30% or thereabouts that we're not finding on any one day, and it probably becomes a smaller number on a day when we've got great testing. It absolutely tells you that anyone who's symptomatic needs to come forward for testing, because that's what will get us to 0 cases, 0 community transmission. But I don't think it's a huge number. I think the fact that you find a case and you link it to other known outbreaks, even if that individual isn't aware of those existing outbreaks, tells you that people who are symptomatic come forward, and we're making that link.
You spoke about the end game. This could be the last weeks of coronavirus in Victoria, but these outbreaks recently have, I think, made people fearful that it's not the end. Are you telling us that we still are at the end? Do you still believe that? Yeah,
I still believe it. We shouldn't be complacent. I'm telling everyone not to be complacent, because this could fail. This could fail if people don't come forward for testing, if people don't follow the restrictions, and if people certainly don't isolate or quarantine when they absolutely have to. But those things being done well we'll get there. There's no question we'll get there if people can come forward for testing, isolate and quarantine, wear masks, and do all of the things that we're asking of them. It's been a long haul. There's no question people are tired. There's no question it's been really the most challenging year in many, many people's lives, and that our reserves are low. But it's also amazing to see the resilience of people through this. And I think people have been resilient, seeing that slowly but surely we're getting to a point where we can have a much easier and less restricted summer going forward. I make references to Europe. Australia is not Europe. I'm not trying to say that we are, but they are going into a phase over winter where they've got months and months of mask wearing and staying at home and not being able to visit other households in the foreseeable future. It's going to be really tough for them. We are trying to be on a one-way track where every point where we go through another step is easier and less restrictive, and I think people have that in mind. I know it's tough, but I think the resilience that we've got will get us over that line.
So the Box Hill cluster, the extra new case, is that a patient or a staff member?
Staff member, as far as I know, yeah.
Does that worry you that staff members are picking them up? We've had all these interventions, supposed mask fitting and things like that. Does that worry you? Well,
look, we don't want any new cases at all, but we do have to investigate with each and every case that arises what the root cause analysis tells us. But it's not clear in this case. But I don't want to see any more staff cases. We're down to 19 active cases in health staff of any kind, in aged care, in acute services. But I don't want to see another one.
On the 14-day average, it's been dropping fairly steadily for quite some time, but since Wednesday it's sort of plateaued about in the 9s. If it stays in the 9s for the next week or so, would you be more nervous about opening up come next Monday, or, when that announcement's
Yeah, look, I think obviously we've got a target of 5 per day. As I've said, the reassuring thing is the outbreak contribution to that daily number. We could see that fall away pretty quickly as outbreaks come under control to that underlying number of 2 or 3. That would be much more reassuring. But it doesn't mean that there can't be a consideration on that day. But we just need to look at exactly what changes can be made with those numbers.
Obviously, we're at 11 as a rolling average when we ended our first stint of lockdown of the first wave. Things are definitely different, but why should we continue to put up with these restrictions if we ultimately weren't going to see a second wave if it weren't for hotel quarantines outbreaks?
Oh no, I think, hotel quarantine was the source of the second wave, but the contributions there were the number of mystery cases that were happening at that time and the rolling average. And so having that in mind and taking those lessons about exactly where you're at a point in time when you ease restrictions are really critical. And it's telling us that we can get to a point where a slow and steady approach with a very measured easing of restrictions means that we can have, appropriate confidence that we sustain those low numbers or get to no community transmission for the long term. So it's not just a case of throwing our hands up and giving up. We just need to be happy that those numbers are guiding us as we take the next step.
Can we ask you a question? Is your alleged subversion of the normal cabinet process partly to blame for some of the hotel quarantine problems?
Well, we've got a board of inquiry that's currently writing a report. I don't accept that criticism, but ultimately that'll be a matter for the board to report on, among many other matters. That's an arm's length process and one that we should allow to run its course. It's just a few weeks' time, there'll be a report, and of course we'll all be in a position to have a more detailed discussion about whatever it is that the board finds, recommendations that are made.
Should the board be cautious about your evidence?
Again, that's a judgment that the board can make. I've provided my evidence both in written form and in testimony, and the board can draw their own conclusions, as I'm sure they will. That's exactly the role that they have to play.
Jenny McArdle wasn't briefed by Kim Peake, were you, when she was reporting directly to you about
I've already dealt with those matters. And I'm not going to run a commentary on evidence that I've given or on the process that's still active. It is an ongoing process, and I know it's frustrating. I'd like the report to come tomorrow, but it does take some time. The board has been through the best part of 300,000 pages of evidence. They've heard from many, many witnesses. They're now writing a report. That report is eagerly awaited by all of us because it'll give us findings, it'll give us advice on what we should do in terms of next steps. But it's just not appropriate for me to be trying to predict what that report will or won't cover, where they'll land. That's entirely a matter for them. And it is just a few weeks off, and then we will have that report. And at that point, all Victorians can be confident that I'll take the action that is necessary to make sure that these sorts of mistakes are not made again.
What actions are you intending on taking, or could you take?
Well, let's not speculate too much. We have to wait and see what comes out. My judgment is there will be findings, and then there will be, I think, a series of different. There'll be advice. So the board will recommend to government and its agencies that certain changes get made. That's what I would think would come out of that report. But it is a matter for them, and I don't want to get into the business of trying to direct them one way or the other. They've got to do that work, and I'm confident they are. But as I've said many times, we won't hesitate to take up the findings and any recommendations that are made, and to make sure that changes are made so that we can't have this sort of thing happen again.
Are you surprised or disappointed about the submissions by Ms Makakos? Obviously, you worked together for a long time. You worked very closely together this year, and she's been quite scathing of your handling of the pandemic response, both in terms of the quarantine process and the aftermath of that.
I'm not interested in getting into a debate with anybody on these matters, frankly. There's submissions that have been made to a board of inquiry. The board has to write its report. They're doing that work. They will provide a report, and as I said, we'll be in a position to have a much freer discussion about what the findings are, what the recommendations are, and the action that I propose to take once I have that. That's just a few weeks away. I don't think there's any useful purpose served by getting into a debate and a discussion about these things. That's in many respects your job. Sorry?
Have you spoken with Ms Makakos since she resigned?
No.
So you weren't disappointed by her submissions?
No, I frankly have got many things to focus on at the moment, Bridget, and I just haven't got time to be engaging in those sorts of debates and discussions. That's a submission made to an independent process. Let's see where they land in terms of all of the work that they're doing. I've got many other things to focus on, and I think the Victorian community would want me focused on those things, getting these numbers low, keeping them low, making sure that we've got the best public health response we can possibly have, and working on very, very substantial budget. That'll be all about repair, recovery, but also making sure Victoria is better than it ever was. That's our mission, and that's what we're going to do. And when we make those announcements quite soon, I think that people will see our budget will deliver exactly what the federal budget has done, and that is to follow the advice of the Reserve Bank Governor, to borrow to build, to use the strength and the resilience of the Victorian state budget to protect household budgets. Jobs, skills, confidence, investment, that's what we're working on. That's what's dominating so much of my time, not some of these other matters. That process is at arm's length. It'll do its work, and we await the final report.
Jenny Makakos says that she thinks it was a shared responsibility between her and the Jobs Minister, Martin Pakula. You said in your statement that you thought she was the minister responsible. Why is it that you came to that conclusion that's so different?
Look, I think we've covered this ground at the time. I've provided evidence, both written evidence and appeared before the board, answered all the questions I was asked, and those answers speak for themselves. I've made one submission. I haven't made multiple submissions. I've made one, and I would invite you to have a read of that, have a listen to that. That's exactly where it's up to. It'll be for the board to make findings about all of these matters. It's not for me. I don't think it's appropriate, frankly, for me to be pulling apart differences of opinion, different views, commentary by others that I had no involvement in. I haven't got the time, nor do I think it's appropriate for me to be essentially preempting the work that the Judge Coate and all of her team are doing. That's really important work.
Can you not explain your views though, and how you came to?
Well,
that
I have.
conclusion?
Well, again, I'm not going to go through all the different reasons, all the different documents, all the different facts, and they are facts. I just invite you to read the transcript of my evidence and to read the witness statement that I handed up to the board. That's there for everyone to see.
Given that you believe the DHHS was in charge, though, do you have full confidence in Kim Peake, who's currently heading up the?
Yes, I do, and I've answered these questions as well at the time in relation to a number of secretaries. But we'll wait for the board to hand down their report and the findings and whatever recommendations they make. which is not for today. Obviously, that's in a few weeks time.
Do you think it's implausible that no one made the decision to use private security guards, or do you think that is what happened?
Well, again, that's the central feature of whether it is or isn't is a matter for the board, but it's obviously a pretty important question and one that the board will be turning their mind to. And just because that has not become completely obvious or evident throughout the process to this point, it is still free for the board to make findings. And they'll be doing that important work with the benefit of having examined each of those 290,000 pages, having listened to all of those witnesses that were called. That is rightly their work to do. And when they've got a report, they'll hand it down first week of November, and we'll be able to have a look at that and have a much more detailed discussion then. Again, the inquiry was not set up for the avoidance of answers or the avoidance of questions. It's there to get us answers. And I just don't think it's appropriate, and I think you'd have to give me some credit for being consistent on this. It's just not appropriate that I try and conduct the inquiry from this podium or draft the report from this podium. I understand why you asked the questions, perfectly legitimate. But it's not appropriate for me, I think, to be drawn into rerunning all the evidence that's been led, trying to analyse different components of that. That's the job of the board, and they will do that. And in just a few weeks' time, we'll have a report, and then we can all have lots of questions and lots of answers about that. I'm in no doubt that that'll be a rather lengthy press conference. There might even be a few of them. That's for then. That isn't for now.
Has Minister McCullough taken enough responsibility for this?
Well, again, I would direct you to his witness statement, his evidence, the work that he's doing. Again, that's a matter for the board to make findings. But I think it's pretty clear. There was a control agency. There was a very, very clear structure to this program. They are the matters I went to in my evidence. I don't intend to run a commentary any further than that.
Premier, I want to ask you a question if I can.
Sure.
It doesn't go to the content of evidence at the inquiry. It goes to 8 comments you have made here in evidence. In this press conference, you've said very clearly that you regard the inquiry having all the powers it needs to get to the bottom of the matter,
yep,
and that if it needed more powers, it should seek powers. In the VicPol submission that was lodged overnight, VicPol make it very clear in a number of reference points in their submission that there is not adequate powers to provide the full phone records of former Commissioner Graham Ashton. As we know, the inquiry only has his outgoing calls, not his ingoing calls. The VicPol submission asserts that prior to 2 o'clock there was a decision made in relation to the use of private security in hotel quarantine, and the VicPol submission assert that that decision was made and communicated by an individual. They say someone in their submission at or around 1:12 p.m. and 1:22 p.m. And they say that the Inquiries Act, the Victorian Inquiries Act, doesn't give Jennifer Coate the powers to get to that point made by a former police commissioner that he was told by someone that a decision was made on that day in relation to private security. Does it still have, in your opinion, the powers it needs to get to the evidence of the incoming phone calls to Graham Ashton?
Sure. Well, a couple of points. Firstly, former Chief Commissioner Graham Ashton's provided a written witness statement. He then appeared for a lengthy period of time and answered all the questions that were asked of him. That's the first point. So it's not like he's not been heard from. The second point I'd make is that, in my judgment, if former Judge Coate was of the view that she needed further powers, then she would ask for that through the appropriate channels. I don't believe there's been any request for additional powers or, if you like, the communication of a problem. So here we think this is an issue we'd like to get to the bottom of, and we're limited in some way. I don't believe there's been any. That's not been the view that the board has put to government.
That's very much
on that. I know that's the view of perhaps
Victoria Police. In their submission.
Yeah, and there are lots of submissions, but Victoria Police are not running this inquiry. The inquiry is being run by a former judge.
The powers that they seek in relation to the Telecommunications Interception Act are federal powers. They're
I'm- I'm-
not
no,
even, they're
yeah.
powers that are not even in your gift to
No,
provide.
indeed. But again, the key point here is Victoria Police have made a submission. The inquiry will look at that submission like all submissions that are made. This sort of line of inquiry is not brand new. This has been, this issue has not been raised for the very first time. I think this would be known to the Board of Inquiry, and I'm just making the point to you that I think they're uniquely placed to know whether they have adequate powers or not. They certainly, and I'm not for a moment saying it would be my gift or the gift or something they could simply
it's
do.
Commonwealth legislation,
That's it.
not
That's
state
yes,
legislation.
absolutely. That's the point I'm making. What I'm saying to you is though they've not given, even though they are uniquely placed to determine what they need, they've not come to me. They've not come to government and said, look, this is a gap. This is a deficiency. We need it remedied. Can you assist us, for instance, in that? There's been no such dialogue or discussion. If it were to come forward, if they were to raise an issue like that or any other issue, much like when they came to us a couple of weeks ago, roughly a couple of weeks ago and said we need more money, the answer was almost instantaneous and it was in the affirmative. So we're all here to help and to provide whatever support and assistance we can.
With respect, Premier, it's not a question of resources. This is a question of access to telephone records,
Sure.
which would prove, according to the contention of Victoria Police and Graham Ashton, that an individual communicated in that 6-minute period to Graham Ashton that there was a decision, not a creeping assumption, that there was a decision in relation to hotel quarantine. Now, Graham Ashton's records are incomplete because he cannot access, without a federal warrant, not state warrant, federal warrant, the incoming call record. But I might state that Chris Eccles, your records, Lisa Neville's records, and indeed your Chief of Staff's phone records, none of those at all have been provided to this inquiry. And I would think that that would be a very important piece of evidence to any inquiry worth its salt.
Well, you may choose to reflect on the inquiry. I'm not. They will seek what they believe is appropriate, and I don't think anyone.
I'm
I don't think
making the point they don't have
Yeah.
the powers under the State
but
Inquiries Act.
No, but with the greatest of respect, though, you've just gone a little bit further than that, and perhaps given the inference that things have not been provided to the inquiry. The inquiry didn't seek any of the material that you've just outlined. So I wouldn't want anyone listening or watching at home to think that there was some material that was not handed up. It was not sought. All material that has been sought has been handed up, and all those, to my knowledge, all those who were asked to give evidence or to provide witness statements have done that. I'm not arguing that there's an equivalence between the budget and statutory powers. The point I'm making to you, though, maybe I wasn't as clear as I should have been. The point I'm making to you is, at any point where this inquiry has sought more from the government, the answer has been yes. So the budget issue, I think, hopefully establishes a really key point here. If a deficiency, if a problem were raised, then we would work as cooperatively as possible with former Judge Cope to try and remedy that. Whether it was within our gift or not, we are able to make representations to others, and we do that on a regular basis.
So, Premier,
But those matters have not been raised.
Were you specifically asked for your phone records to be tendered to the inquiry?
I don't believe so.
And do you know?
And that's not a matter for me, though. That's a matter for the board. As to others, I can't answer for that. You'd have to speak to the board about what it is what they did and didn't seek, what they did and didn't ask for. That's entirely a matter for a process that is completely at arm's length from government, as it should be, under an act of the Victorian Parliament.
Can I ask about the budget and the economy,
Sure.
Premier? There was forecast in the federal budget that the Victorian population is going to grow a lot slower than what we thought it was going to in the next
Yes.
few years. How do you think that's going to affect our economy and our budget
Yeah.
position?
Well, look, if you look at what economists call multi-factor growth, so growth that's about productivity, but it's also about the population growing, and there are lots of different sources for that. We've got a birth rate, we've got interstate migration, we've got overseas migration. Obviously, those parts of that multifactorial growth that are influenced by borders being closed, for instance, I think that's going to be a real challenge for us, and the federal budget spoke to that. And indeed, ours will probably speak to that as well in terms of some of the aggregates and some of the forecasts that our Treasury will put forward. I would just say, when it comes to these circumstances, the challenge that we face, it is unprecedented, and it will present in some very obvious ways now, but there will be a tail to this. There will be different ways in this, in which this will become obvious to us. So it's not just one budget. It's going to need to be a sustained effort, sustained investment, projects that are both large to give a pipeline and certainty to that part of our market, but also lots of smaller projects that can be got away quickly, that underpin jobs in a really immediate sense. Skills has been a focus in recent times of some of the decisions that the Commonwealth have made. We'll have a lot more to say about that, because we know that the skills you need for the job you want is just critical. I think we can, all of us, do better in linking the training that we support and subsidise, or indeed make free, as is the case with our government, and the needs of industry, both today and into the future. So those linkages can always be stronger. There are then some core strengths of our Victorian economy that I think can take a big step and become an even bigger part of our story. We've got some really key strengths when it comes to food and fibre, that whole sport, culture, major events, as challenging as those sectors are at the moment, given the virus, but they've always been a strength for us and can go to a new place. And then, of course, you think about it, we have some of the best science in the world coming out of this city and state. So biotechnology, medical research, and the translation of that into products on shelves, that's something that Andrew Liveris, working on behalf of the federal government, has spoken about at great length. That gap between good ideas and really good science, really clever people who do amazing things, and then getting to prototyping, taking manufacturing to scale, having that onshore. That's not something that we've done as well as we could. So all of those things are on the table, all of those things and many, many more. But it will be a budget, as I said, that uses the state budget and the strong position of the state budget to protect household budgets. And it'll be a budget that borrows, because there's simply no alternative but to follow the advice that Philip Lowe, the Governor of the Bank, has told us. All of us need to do more, and the budget will deliver in spades on all of that. And there's also some very important issues that we shouldn't let pass by. The toxic nature of insecure work is something that has been very, very well and truly exposed over these last 6 or 8 months. We don't have all the levers there, but there are perhaps some things we can do there. We know from previous economic downturns that if you don't provide really well targeted wraparound services, case management, if you like, for those who have been displaced, those who are unemployed, then there can be a very long and punishing and particularly damaging tail to that. It can take many, many years for people who have lost their jobs to get back into the labour market, and that's across all age groups. I think there's been a disproportionate economic impact in terms of women, and that'll be a key focus of our budget. Again, I won't go too much further, or the Treasurer won't be particularly pleased with me.
Well, Premier, will community sport resume this year, or is it being pushed back into next year?
No, it definitely can resume. It's happening in limited circumstances in regional Victoria now. We think that we'll be able to have more to say about that, but again, it has to be safe. And I think there'll be differences between different settings for contact sport versus non-contact sport. I think there'll be different rules, certainly indoor, outdoor, and the other dividing line has been junior sport versus adult sport. So we'll get as much back as we can, but safety has to guide us in that. No, but I wouldn't draw that conclusion.
You said you'd come back to us on Halloween as well a couple of days ago. I know it's a long way away, but do you have any more clarity as to what people might be able to do, even if it's outside?
No, I don't, and I apologise for not having come back to you. That I don't forget much, but that had slipped my mind. I'll have a stern word with the Chief Health Officer as to why we haven't got clarity for you on that issue. I will we will come back to you. I expect masks, 5 kilometres, all the other rules will still apply, and the rules in regional Victoria being different, but masks would be a feature of it, particularly if you're leaving your house. But if there's any further specific advice I can provide you for that particular occasion, we'll make sure you get that today. Well and truly before your deadline.
Can we also get clarity on the wedding photos with masks?
I understood that. I haven't got that, but I've asked for it, and it'll go up onto the website if it hasn't already, as soon as possible, because I thought it was a bit, there was a little bit complex in its first version. I'm not saying it'll change dramatically. It's public health advice, but it just needs to be as proportionate as possible, and particularly given that in most cases the bride and groom or the two people getting married will be from the same household. There are some issues around whether photography is actually a permitted industry at the moment, all of those sorts of things, but I think we were just trying to tidy that up and get it into the simplest place possible. We'll make sure that happens today too, if it hasn't already.
Premier, there's another inquiry happening in New South Wales into Crown Resorts, Crown Casinos. There's questions coming up about the shareholder arrangements there. James Pack has admitted that maybe he needs to give up some of his ownership of the company, and there's questions about how it should be viable. Do you think our regulator in Victoria should look into those issues with Crown as well?
Oh, look, I wouldn't make a comment about an ongoing inquiry that is in another state. I'll freely admit I've not been following that in any great detail at all. We've got one or two other things on. But what I would say to you, as a former gaming minister, the findings, positive or negative, about any player in the international casino community, wagering, gaming community, are always followed by, in our case, the VCGLR. That regulator community, and it is a community across the world, your good standing or otherwise, based on processes that can be a long way away from your interests and holdings and your obligations in any given setting, all of that field is looked at, if you like, so that canvas is absolutely looked at. But I couldn't make any judgments about what's been said there or what might be found. But if you're asking me, should Victorians be reassured that any findings, good or bad, against any operator in Victoria are always known and studied and understood by our regulator, the answer is absolutely yes.
Premier, can I ask you a question about Emergency Management Victoria Commissioner Andrew Crisp?
Yes.
This is not to do with the Coates inquiry. It's to do with evidence he gave on the 26th of August to the parliamentary inquiry.
Yes.
And in evidence there, he said 3 times that he briefed the police minister on the day the decision was taken about hotel quarantine on the 27th of March, and then later on the 28th of March. He said 3 times he had briefed her. This week he has recanted that evidence and said that over that 2-day period he did not brief her. However, he's a very unusual public servant in that he has a head of power under the Emergency Management Act that's different than anyone else, and he's required under that Act, Section 32, to continually brief his minister. I find it extraordinary that he did not now brief his minister in those 2 days, given Victoria on the 16th of March went into a state of emergency. He also has serious obligations under that same Act, I think it's Section 29, where if there is a neglect of his duty, he should be stood down, suspended, or removed from his post. Now, that's not awaiting the evidence out of the Coates inquiry. That's his own admitted evidence this week to contradict or now recant evidence in a parliamentary inquiry. So will he be stood down?
No, he won't be stood down. I have confidence in Andrew Crisp. Victorians know Andrew Crisp is someone of integrity, someone who showed all of us very clearly last summer and through a career, whether it be as a Special Operations Group police officer, all the way through to a member of Victoria Police Command, and in the EMV role that he's played since, he's shown Victorians what he's made of, and I don't accept many of the conclusions and the characterisation that you've just made. I'm not quibbling with you in terms of the Act, but if you want a further explanation about statements that he's made, these are not statements I've made. the statements that he's made
No, but you
to
administer
a...
this act.
Yeah, indeed.
You administer this act, and the
Well,
act says he must brief his minister. He
well,
now
minister,
says he didn't brief his minister.
Yeah.
And Victoria was in a state of emergency. You would expect in a state of emergency that the minister would be briefed. He now says he did not brief her, and there are provisions in the act if he doesn't adhere to the requirements of the act, including briefing ministers, that he should be suspended and his commission terminated. Why would he not at least be investigated?
I think I've just answered that for you. In terms of the statements that he's made, then you'd need to speak to him about what he has said to a parliamentary inquiry. I've had no involvement whatsoever in either the evidence he gave or the presentation he gave to that parliamentary committee, or his consideration of the transcript, and therefore any further comments that he's made. You're asking me whether he retains my confidence, and my answer is yes.
No, I'm not asking you that with respect. I'm asking you that against the act that you administer, it would appear he is in breach of the act.
Well, I don't see it in those terms, and therefore it becomes a matter of confidence, and I have confidence in him, and I can't add much more than that. There are provisions. To see him as a public servant is curious in some respects. He is a statutory officer in many ways.
Well, no, legally
he takes
a statutory officer.
That's right. He takes his responsibilities very seriously. He administers them with a degree of professionalism that I think is well known and well understood to the Victorian community. I really don't have much more to add beyond that. His statements, he's made those statements. They're not statements that are made by me. And if you want further detail, further information about what he said and why he said it, then he'd be the person to speak to. I certainly haven't had a communication with him about these matters. I probably can't be any clearer than to again say to you, he retains my confidence, and I think he retains the confidence of the vast majority of Victorians who know and see the job that he does and the person that he is.
On at least a couple of occasions, though, he's been forgetful. His PAYEC evidence, he said one thing and then changed it later. In the hotel's inquiry, he couldn't remember some of the notes he made and who made the decision on private security. Can you explain why that's acceptable to you, that he can't remember?
I'm not going to try and explain how people's memories function.
No,
I don't know that that's necessarily something that I can add much to.
What
I would say though is this: he's provided evidence, he's provided statements where he felt there was a need to correct the record. He's done that, again with no involvement from me. That's a judgment that he's made. If you're asking me why I retain confidence in him, it is because of his past performance, the work that he's done, the sort of person that he is, and his absolute determination to play his part in this pandemic response, and what's more, to deal with the flooding that the Bureau is forecasting at the moment for later in spring, and to deal with, make ready all the different preparations for what will again be, despite some promising forecasts, almost certainly a long, hot, dry, dangerous summer. A fire season will be on us very soon, and I think he has all the skills, all of the attributes and the performance to lead our emergency management structure now and into the future. That is my view. Beyond that, I think then you're really kind of asking me to pull apart different things he said over time, and I don't know that I'm in any way expert to do that. I might speculate, but I don't know that that'd be relevant or particularly helpful.
Premier, I just want to go back though to the point you made, and I confirm as well, that he's a statutory officer.
Yes.
That gives him a different legal foundation to his work. It's not merely just a matter like with your departmental secretary that you maintain confidence or not. He has very clear, specific legal obligations.
Yes.
Those include briefing his minister. Victoria at the time was in a state of emergency. The apparatus of hotel quarantine was being set up over those 2 days. He had said in a parliamentary inquiry on 3 occasions that he did brief the minister on 27, 28 of March. He has now completely recanted that evidence and said he did not brief the minister. Now, if he is required under law in the Act, not a matter of confidence, a matter of law, that he has to brief the minister, he now says of his own volition he did not brief the minister. In the very same Act, there are clear powers to suspend or remove an individual in that role who has a neglect of duty. Now, we've heard so many times people say these are extraordinary times in Victoria. It was inside the state of emergency time. It would be a case of neglect of duty, wouldn't it, under law, if he didn't brief the minister? Or are you saying that his original evidence back on the 26th of August when he did brief it is in fact the truth?
No, it's not a matter for me to be offering opinions. He's provided evidence. He's reviewed the transcript, and that's the way parliamentary committees work. They provide you with what the draft Hansard of what you've said. If you want to make any corrections based on, in fact, for instance, or if you wanted to clarify matters, then that's open to you to do that. I think you're drawing a conclusion and you're making a judgment that he has been neglectful, and I don't believe that's the case. I don't believe that's the case at all. And the obligation that you point to is one of many different obligations that he has under that Act and under the operating procedures and processes of his office.
I've got the Act here and I've gone through it very carefully. I also note that he recanted his evidence after Lisa Neville said that she was not briefed in evidence to the Court inquiry on those 2 days. Before Lisa Neville's evidence to the Court inquiry, he said to a parliamentary inquiry in August that in fact he did brief her. Now, he had an opportunity to correct the Hansard on the parliamentary inquiry within the 24 hours that the Hansard was provided to him.
Yes.
But 6 weeks later, he corrects his evidence to the parliamentary inquiry, but only after the police minister says she was not briefed.
I'm well aware of the sequence. What I'd say to you is I can't speak to that. Only Emergency Management Commissioner Crisp can speak to that. And I'm sure that if you've got questions that you want to put to him, then he'll look at those questions and he'll provide you with answers. I've not had a discussion with him about these matters. I'm in no way involved in any of these matters. He has sought to correct the record, and he obviously has made a judgment that he believes that's an important thing to do. He's done it. It's not something he spoke to me about. I'm trying to be as respectful as I can. I can't offer any more than that. What I won't be doing, though, is drawing some of those ultimate conclusions that you've put to me. I don't think that's fair. But as to...
brief from your department or the Department of Justice as to whether, now that he has admitted he did not brief the police minister in those 2 critical days when Victoria was under a state of emergency, have you sought a brief from any department that reports through to you as to whether he has met the requirements of the Act?
No, I've not asked that specific question. No. I think we're all rather focused on getting on and getting the job done. But again, if you want to know more about what prompted him to make those statements, then the only person that you can speak to is him, because he's the one that's...
I'm not interested in Mr. Crisp, Premier. I'm actually interested
well, I am.
in...
I'm rather interested in him getting on and doing his job, which I'm confident he's doing.
I'm interested in his administration of the responsibilities under this Act as a statutory officer.
Well, you seem to have drawn some conclusions about whether he has or hasn't done that. I'm simply saying to you as politely as I can, I don't draw the same conclusion. You've asked me a direct question about have I spent considerable time over the last few days asking my department to look into this matter, and the answer clearly, no, I haven't. We're rather focused on many other matters, and that is directly the product of the fact that he's made a judgment. I believe him to be a person of absolute integrity. He's made a judgment that he needed to correct the record. He's done that. He didn't seek permission. He didn't ask for help. He didn't discuss it with me. That's not a matter that I am in any way involved in. Do I have confidence in him? Yes, I do. That is my position.
Last questions, please.
New South Wales has had this in the past 4 days, 10, 11 and 12 on the case numbers. Does that give you hope that we can perhaps open with similar figures, given they're under fewer restrictions than what we have?
Like, I think it's important to... There was a bit of commentary a couple of weeks ago, I think, when we had about 350 active cases, and it's, well, New South Wales was open then, why can't we be open? And there was one number that wasn't mentioned. They had daily 14-day rolling average at 1.5 cases, something like that. At the same time, we were still 15, 20 cases. So, or certainly more than we are now, and not 1.5. So I think we have to appreciate, and I think people do, that the amount of community transmission, the chains of transmission, the nature of this, that whole interplay between large families and high-risk workplaces, and that's a two-way thing, that makes this second wave very, very different to our first, very different to the conditions that are the kind of the state of play, if you like, up in New South Wales. I don't want to see any more cases in New South Wales at all, and I'm sure they have the same view in terms of us. I'll just take you back to the point that Brett made in his remarks earlier, and I think it's a point that's been made many, many times. Numbers are critically important, but the narrative that sits behind them is just as important, particularly when you get to such low numbers. 5 on a day, 10 on a day, even 15 or 20 on a day, if you have got a high degree of confidence that you have got a public health response and you've wrapped those people up, if you like, and they're not mystery cases, and you've got contacts and contacts of contacts all doing the right thing, well then, with such small numbers, you can have a greater sense of certainty. Can you ever be 100% certain when it comes to this virus? Probably not. And that speaks to the fact that there will always be a percentage of people who are symptomatic but don't go and get a test for whatever reason. And that's why, again, if we want to have rules akin to those north of us, if we want to have a COVID normal summer and a COVID normal 2021, anyone today, anyone, no matter your circumstance, no matter where you live, any symptoms whatsoever, please come forward and get tested today. Don't wait till Monday. Please get tested today. Arguably nothing's more valuable than your test result, and if it is positive, then we will protect you and your family and every family. Where this gets really challenging for us is if there's more virus out there than is evident to us, and if we only find it once it's spread and it's infected many, many people. We want to try and avoid that as much as we possibly can, and that all gets back to people, even the mildest of symptoms. That should be a call to action to go and get tested, and importantly, you'll get your result back. 96-97% of results are coming back within 24 hours, despite the volumes. To have done more than 30,000 tests these last couple of days is a credit to Victorians who are listening to these messages and then they're acting on it. That's how we'll get, I know it's a bit counterintuitive, the more you look normally the more you find, but it's the finding that matters. If you find them, you can isolate them and it doesn't spread as it will if it goes untested.
Premier, are you lobbying the New South Wales Premier to open their border to regional Victoria? And if not, why not?
Oh, look, the reason I'm not on the phone, 3 times a week trying to hassle Gladys into doing things, because I've got confidence that they've made their decisions based on data, based on science, and that will continue to guide them. I think we will finish up with a greater freedom of movement, I should say, between regional Victoria and parts of New South Wales, if not all of New South Wales. That'll be a matter for them to make judgments about. I'll probably speak with Gladys over the course of the weekend, perhaps, given that we're moving into a very different phase, and there's been some public commentary from their government about maybe some changes. Look, I've tried to be as clear as I can with this. If the circumstances were different, if it was us, if you flipped it, I think I've said many times that I would probably have made the same choice that Gladys and I and the Prime Minister agreed to, or the choice that Stephen Marshall's made, or the choice that Peter Gutwein down in Tasmania's made. You've got to do everything you can to try and protect people, and that's what drives this. So my confidence is based on the fact that what's driven these decisions will continue to drive them, and as our numbers fall, our risk becomes much lower, and that will mean there will be a time when there can be much more movement within Victoria, and indeed movement beyond.
Many businesses are hanging on this third step, whether it be outdoor dining or
Yes.
otherwise. You've been pretty good with giving some notification, particularly for businesses. Should
Yep.
they be tuning in on Sunday to get a week's head start?
No, it's not possible for us to be giving people a full week's notice, and I know that's very challenging. But if I were to make, so for instance, if you go back 1 week, if I'd made announcements a week ago, we've only really become fully aware of, a week or a little bit more say, we've only really become fully aware of some of these outbreaks during this week and certainly the latter part of last week. So, you know, that just shows you, I think things can happen quickly. This thing moves silently, rapidly, just so wildly infectious, and particularly so many people who don't know that they've got it. So if you think about just these last 7 days, or maybe 10 days, say, Frankston, Chadstone, Kilmore, Benalla, that's I don't know how many postcodes it is now, 14, 15 different suburbs. I think that makes the point that you've got to wait as long as you can to get as much data as you can, because that gives you the most complete picture. And what that will mean, sadly, is that some businesses who were given notice previously, they won't be getting a lot of notice. But I think if the choice is waiting until the 18th and get a week's notice then, I think they'd much rather be open in some way or another as soon as possible. That's what we're working towards. And look, just like regional Victoria, we couldn't give them much notice either, but they've changed things up to comply with those rules. And if it stops raining at some point, they'll be able to take advantage of some of those outdoor dining opportunities even more than they have been in recent weeks. We've just got to wait for the most complete picture. That's when you know whether what you're doing is safe, and that has to drive us.
Premier, just one more question from me.
Sure.
Because of the constraints of the Federal Telecommunications Interception Act and the inquiry being able to obtain complete and full phone records, we know that the issue, and it's included again in Graham Ashton's submission today, in closing statement to the inquiry, the code inquiry, it pertains to an incoming call to Graham Ashton, as he says, in that 6-minute period. Given the constraint of getting the incoming calls, for the avoidance of doubt, are you, Chris Eccles, and indeed your Chief of Staff, prepared to provide your outgoing calls in that 6-minute period, which would be freely available to you from Telstra, freely available in your own personal records? That information has not yet been provided to the inquiry. Would you be happy to provide that to the inquiry?
We've been happy all along. If the inquiry sought information from us, from any Victorian, then the answer should be yes.
To provide it anyway, whether they ask
Well,
for it or
no,
not.
hang
I
on.
mean, it
No,
goes to
no,
the
no,
heart of the
no,
question
no,
of
it-
who called Ashton
No, it
in
doesn't.
that 6-minute period.
I would have thought that we'd well and truly established, if not from today's press conference, but from many that I've done in recent times, that the inquiry is independent. The Inquiries Act makes that's not a matter of opinion, that is a matter of fact. And I'm not going to get into, if you like, telling the inquiry what they should seek, what they should call for, what they should find. They are, having looked at nearly 300,000 pages, having heard from witnesses from, far and wide, I'm confident that if they believe there is a deficiency or an incompleteness in terms of the picture that they are working with, it is within their power to raise those matters.
It is not in their power. Let me be very clear.
No, you don't.
The inquiry that you have established, led by Jennifer Coate, under the Victorian Inquiries Act, does not have the power to request from you or your Chief of Staff or Mr. Eccles phone records. That is only under the Federal Telecommunications Interception Act. It is not a power or an ability open to Justice Coate. But you, as an individual, your Chief of Staff and Mr. Eccles can willingly provide that information now and completely clear up this 6-minute period that has been, I think, the subject of a lot of debate and conjecture. You could clear that up tomorrow with your own free provision of records available to you now.
I understand the point that you're making, but the point you're making seems to miss, I think, a really key element here. I've given evidence. Mr. Ashton's given evidence. There's no federal or state prohibition on people being asked a question. In fact, they're obliged, regardless of which Parliament passed the law, to answer fully.
Premier.
Yeah, but he could have been asked about those matters.
but he could
I'm not the one doing the asking.
Excuse me, Premier, but in his evidence again today in the submission and closing arguments, when Mr. Ashton is asked, he does say that someone called him with that decision. someone called him. He can't recall who it is. But
Well, there
he
you
is-
go. So again,
No, please. He's a former police commissioner who clearly says he had a call in that period of time. He cannot remember the name, but he says it was an individual. He puts it again in writing into the submission. Now, if
we're
his
kind
record
of going around in circles here. What I'm saying
so
to
if
you is
his record
that
of incoming calls could be obtained, we would be able to tell who called him. If you, your Chief of Staff or Mr Eccles provided your phone records at that time, and if you did not call Mr Ashton, this whole matter would be cleared up.
Well, and with the greatest of respect, if you're putting it to me that somehow you've got the power to make a request of me, but that the board doesn't, that's just not right. If the board requires that information or any other information, again, with the greatest of respect, they can seek that from anyone they choose. If that person was then to say, well, no, I'm not going to do that because there's a clear line between the authority of the state versus the Commonwealth when it comes to these matters, well, then that would be an argument free for them to make. But with the greatest of respect, I don't agree with the notion that somehow you and your network have an ability to put something to me and make a request of me, but the Board of Inquiry doesn't. The Board has that power. The Board has that. No, and I'm answering your question, and they've been lengthy questions, and I'm not in the business of speaking over people, and I'm not going to start doing that now. But if you just let me complete the answer, the Board, in my judgment, has the powers it needs. They've not sought any additional powers. They've not highlighted to me or anyone else that I'm aware of any deficiencies or gaps in their terms of reference or in the powers and functions, the abilities that they have. It is free for them to seek further information from anyone. They've not done that. But I am confident that if they believe this matter to be critical, they believe this matter to be of interest to them even, not necessarily importance, those judgments are not for me to make. They would make that judgment. They'd make a request. No such request has been made. Not to me. So
I'm not suggesting, or please don't infer, that I am demanding you put those records out. My question to you is, very clearly again today, in the Victoria Police submission, they say there is not the powers available to this inquiry in Victoria, as does the Inquiry Act, as does the terms of reference that you establish this inquiry under. None of those powers in the state of Victoria can access federal telecommunications held phone records.
no, that's not a point of argument.
Please,
I'm not.
I finished the question, and my point to you is, you can freely provide your outgoing calls, as Mr Ashton did to the inquiry. No one else, a party to giving evidence, yourself, Lisa Neville, Chris Eccles, no one else has provided the level of phone record information as Graham Ashton has. If you were to provide your outgoing calls, the clarification in relation to then the incoming calls to Mr Ashton's phone would be very clear. Now, the Commissioner cannot, Justice Coate, can't require you to do that because she cannot
But
use
she's not
a
even
federal
asked.
warrant.
She's
She
not
has
even
no
asked.
power.
She's not even asked, which is a point that I think seems to be missing here.
But why wouldn't you
If
just
she
provide
makes
it anyway?
because frankly, the inquiry, the board are conducting this inquiry. They're doing that work, and if they want to make a request of me, then they're free. They are
So if they made a
free
request,
to do
would
so.
you exceed the request?
They are
Would you
free.
do it?
Well, this is the point that I was making earlier on. All requests that have been made by the Independent Board of Inquiry have been agreed to, whether that be an additional funding, my completing a witness statement, which is a Q&A. It's basically a series of questions get put to me. Did all that. Please, could you come along and appear and answer all questions? Yes, I did that. I think I've well and truly demonstrated my faith in this process and my willingness to be a part of it. I established the inquiry after all. So again, if requests were made, then of course, on our form, and I'll confirm for you right now, of course we would provide and be cooperative in any way we possibly could. In any way we
Including phone
possibly
records
could.
for all
Well,
the
again,
parties who haven't provided them to date?
if requests were made, but that's for the board. That's for the board to determine whether they want that information or any other information. But I wouldn't want anyone to draw from any of our discussion today the notion that things have been sought and have not been handed up, because that would be absolutely inaccurate. Any and all matters that they've sought, including additional funding, have been provided, and that won't change. We're all of us should be and are fully cooperating in a process that we set up. The alternative, of course, would be to mark your own work. That I don't think that was appropriate. That's why we set up the Independent Board of Inquiry. It's why they're doing their work. It's why they'll report in due course.
Crown Premier.
Yes, sorry.
Your government announced an urgent inquiry into Crown yourselves last year.
Yes.
Has that started?
I'd need to come back to you. I don't know. I'd need to come back to you on the status of that, but I'm more than happy to do that. I'll ask the Minister to come back to you.
Can I ask just Brett one more question?
Sure.
Sorry.
Yes, you most certainly can.
The one additional case in Kilmore, Brett, was that person in isolation already? Had they been contacted?
I think so. I can clarify for you, but I believe so.
Do you know when they visited the cafe?
Not the date, not the exact date, but there were several days that we know of because of the staff members as well as the diner who were infectious at that time. But I can come back to you. I think we're done. Thank you.
Any other issues? Very good. See you tomorrow.